Imagine this for a second. You wake up one morning and suddenly realize you own hundreds of millions of dollars. Enough money to change your life forever, to buy anything you want, to never work again, to take care of your family, for generations. Now imagine something even worse. You can see all that money. You know it belongs to you, but you can never touch it. Ever. No bank can help. No password reset exists. No customer support. No second chance. Just one mistake that destroys everything. Sounds impossible? Well, for one man, this nightmare became reality. And to this day, people still call it one of the biggest Bitcoin regrets in history. Because this man accidentally lost thousands of Bitcoin. Bitcoin that today would be worth hundreds of millions of dollars. And the craziest part? He knows exactly where it is, but he still can't get it back. Welcome to Crypto Legends, the place where we uncover the craziest crypto stories, hidden investing lessons, and financial mistakes that changed lives forever. Today, we're uncovering the unbelievable story of the man who lost 8,000 Bitcoin, a mistake so painful that people still talk about it more than a decade later. But before we continue, I want you to ask yourself one question. What would you do if someone told you that somewhere in your house there was a hidden fortune worth hundreds of millions of dollars, but you had only one chance to find it? Would you stop everything? Would you search day and night? Would you risk everything to recover it? Because that is exactly what happened. But to understand how this disaster started, we need to go back to a time when Bitcoin was almost worthless, a time when most people laughed at crypto, when nobody believed that digital money could ever become valuable. And one ordinary man made a decision that would later become one of the most painful mistakes in financial history. But trust me, what happened next is even crazier than you think. Because this story isn't just about lost Bitcoin. It's about regret, luck, missed opportunities, and one mistake that changed a life forever. So, how did someone lose a fortune without even realizing it? Well, it all started with a simple hard drive. To understand how someone could lose a fortune, we first need to go back to a completely different time. A time when Bitcoin meant almost nothing, when people weren't becoming rich from crypto because nobody cared about it. Back then, Bitcoin was strange, confusing, and honestly, most people thought it was useless. Imagine telling somebody back then that one digital coin would someday be worth thousands, or even tens of thousands of dollars. They would probably laugh at you, and honestly, who could blame them? Bitcoin looked weird. No physical money, no government backing, no banks, just numbers on a computer screen. And because of that, almost nobody paid attention. But among the few curious people was a man named James Howells. At the time, he was just an ordinary technology enthusiast. Nothing special, not famous, not rich, just someone curious about technology. And one day, he discovered Bitcoin. But here's the crazy part. This was before Bitcoin became famous, before mainstream news, before billionaires talked about crypto, before everyone suddenly wanted to get rich. Back then, you could actually mine Bitcoin using a regular computer. No giant mining companies, no expensive machines, no warehouses full of computers, just patience and curiosity. So James decided to try it. At first, it didn't seem important. It felt more like an experiment, a hobby, something interesting to play with. And over time, he managed to collect thousands of Bitcoin. Yes, thousands. Not 10, not 50, thousands. Today, that sounds unbelievable. But back then, people didn't think much about it, because Bitcoin had almost no value. In fact, There were moments when Bitcoin was worth just a few cents, sometimes even less. So naturally, people treated it casually, almost carelessly. And this is where the story takes a dangerous turn. Because when something feels worthless, people don't protect it. They don't take it seriously. They assume it's probably nothing. And James, like many early Bitcoin users, stored his Bitcoin wallet on a hard drive. A simple computer hard drive, something most people wouldn't think twice about. No fancy security, no giant safe, no million-dollar protection, just a normal piece of technology. And for years, that hard drive sat there, quietly, holding something that would later become one of the biggest hidden fortunes in crypto history. But then, life happened. Technology changed. Computers got replaced. Old devices became junk. And one ordinary day, a simple decision was made. A decision that seemed completely harmless at the time, but would later become one of the most expensive mistakes anyone has ever made. Because one day, that hard drive disappeared. And at first, nobody thought it mattered. Why would they? Bitcoin still wasn't famous. It still looked worthless, still strange, still risky. So life moved on. Days passed, months passed, years passed. And then, something unbelievable happened. Bitcoin exploded. The price started rising, then rising again and again. Suddenly, stories of crypto millionaires started appearing everywhere. People became obsessed. The world changed. And then, one terrifying realization hit James like a lightning bolt. He remembered the hard drive. The same hard drive that had vanished. The same hard drive holding thousands of Bitcoin. And in that moment, everything changed. Because he suddenly realized he hadn't lost an old computer file. He had lost a fortune. But wait, the craziest part of this story hadn't even started yet. Because James believed he knew exactly where that hard drive was. And what he tried next sounds almost impossible. The moment James realized what had happened, everything changed. Because suddenly, this wasn't just an old hard drive anymore. This wasn't old technology. This wasn't forgotten computer junk. No. This was now one of the most valuable objects in his entire life. And the terrifying part? He believed he knew exactly where it was. But there was one massive problem. The hard drive had been thrown away. Yes, thrown away. Accidentally. Like garbage. And according to James, it ended up in a giant landfill. A mountain of trash. Somewhere buried under years of waste. Now pause for a second and imagine this. You suddenly realize that hundreds of millions of dollars might be sitting under piles of garbage. What would you do? Would you give up? Or would you search, no matter how impossible it seemed? Because James refused to give up. He believed there was still hope. So he started trying to recover it. But this wasn't going to be easy. We're not talking about a lost phone or misplaced keys. This was a giant landfill stretching across massive areas, tons and tons of garbage, trash piled on trash, years of waste buried deep underground, and somewhere inside, one tiny hard drive, one small object, potentially holding a life-changing fortune. It sounded impossible, almost insane. But James couldn't stop thinking about it. How could he? Imagine knowing that your future might literally be buried under trash. Every morning, you wake up thinking about it. Every night, you replay the mistake. Why didn't I protect it? Why didn't I check? How could I be so careless? And slowly, that regret started becoming obsession. So, he contacted local authorities. He asked for permission to search the landfill. His idea? To dig through the garbage and recover the hard drive. But there was a problem. A very big problem. The city said, no. They refused. They believed the operation would be too expensive, too dangerous, too complicated. And honestly, can you imagine the challenge? A hard drive, buried under mountains of trash, for years, possibly damaged, possibly crushed, possibly destroyed. Most people would probably give up. They'd say, it's over, forget it, move on. But James, he wasn't ready to let go, because every time Bitcoin's price increased, the pain became worse. Imagine this. When Bitcoin rises, your regret rises too. When Bitcoin crashes, you still feel pain. Because no matter what happens, you still can't access it. And as Bitcoin kept climbing, the numbers became unbelievable. Millions, then tens of millions, and eventually, hundreds of millions of dollars. Think about that. One mistake, one hard drive, one decision, and suddenly, a fortune, gone. But then, James made a decision that shocked the internet, because he wasn't done fighting, not even close. He came up with an unbelievable plan, a plan so crazy that people around the world started paying attention, and what he wanted to do next sounded like something straight out of a movie. Most people would have given up. Honestly, after years of failure, most people would eventually accept reality. They would say, it's gone, forget about it, move on. But James? He couldn't. Because how do you forget something worth hundreds of millions of dollars? How do you move on when somewhere beneath a mountain of trash, your fortune might still exist? So instead of giving up, James became more determined. He started thinking bigger, smarter, more aggressively. And then he came up with a plan so unbelievable that people around the world started talking about it. His idea? To search the landfill using advanced technology. Not just workers, not just digging, but drones, AI systems, sorting machines, robotic technology, even experts. He reportedly planned to build an entire professional operation to search through the trash, layer by layer, piece by piece, until the hard drive was found. And the craziest part? He was willing to spend millions of dollars just to try. Imagine that, spending millions for a chance to recover something you're not even sure still works. Because remember, even if the hard drive was found, there was still another terrifying problem. What if it was broken? What if years underground destroyed it? What if moisture, crushed metal, or damage made recovery impossible? But James was willing to take the risk, because in his mind, even a tiny chance was worth fighting for. And honestly,
Can you blame him?
if someone told you, there's a chance you could recover hundreds of millions of dollars, wouldn't you try? But then, another problem appeared. The city still refused. They continued saying, no. They argued that searching the landfill would cost too much, create environmental problems, and become too dangerous. Year after year, James kept trying, making proposals, offering solutions, trying to negotiate. At one point, he even reportedly offered to share a portion of the recovered money. Imagine hearing that. A city potentially turning down millions of dollars because of one buried hard drive. The internet couldn't believe it. Some people supported him, They said, let him search. What does he have to lose? It's his money. But others? They thought it was hopeless. They said, there's no chance. The drive is destroyed. It's too late. Move on. And honestly, nobody really knew what the truth was. Because here's the painful reality. No one knows if the hard drive still works. No one knows if it still exists. No one knows if all those Bitcoin are still trapped in silence, locked away forever. And that makes this story even more heartbreaking. Because imagine living with uncertainty, not knowing if your fortune is gone forever, or sitting somewhere, waiting to be found. But here's the crazy twist. This story isn't only about bad luck. It teaches us one of the biggest lessons in crypto history. And trust me, this lesson might completely change how you think about money forever. But maybe the craziest part of this entire story isn't the lost Bitcoin. It's the lesson behind it. Because when most people hear this story, they think, wow, that guy was unlucky. That's heartbreaking. That could never happen to me. But honestly, that's exactly what millions of people think, right before they make their own expensive mistake. Because crypto is full of stories like this. Different people, different situations, but the same painful pattern. People underestimate risk. They ignore security. They trust random systems. They assume nothing bad will happen. And sometimes, one small mistake changes everything. Think about James for a second. Back then, Bitcoin looked worthless, so protecting it didn't feel important. And honestly, who could blame him? Very few people saw the future. Very few imagined that Bitcoin would one day create millionaires or billionaires. But here's the powerful truth. The biggest opportunities in life often look small when they first appear. People laugh at them, they ignore them, they underestimate them, until suddenly everyone wishes they paid attention earlier. And maybe that's why this story feels so emotional, because it reminds us how unpredictable life can be. One decision, one forgotten object, one careless moment, and suddenly everything changes. But there's another lesson here, one that every crypto investor needs to hear. Never invest in something you don't understand. Never trust hype blindly. And most importantly, protect what matters. Because in crypto, there are no second chances, no password reset, no emergency support line, no bank to save you. You are responsible for everything. And that responsibility can either build wealth or destroy opportunity. Now, imagine something painful. Imagine James watching Bitcoin prices rise year after year after year, knowing that somewhere beneath a mountain of garbage, his lost fortune might still exist, close enough to imagine, to too far to reach. That feeling must be unbearable, because sometimes the hardest thing isn't losing money, it's living with regret. What if I had protected it? What if I checked one more time? What if I never threw it away? And maybe that's why this story became legendary, not because of Bitcoin, but because it reminds us how one small mistake can become one giant regret. So before you leave, I want to ask you something. If you suddenly discovered that you lost millions of dollars, but there was still a tiny chance to recover them, would you keep fighting? Or would you let it go? Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this unbelievable crypto story, subscribe to Crypto Legends, because the next story might completely change the way you think about money. Until next time, stay smart, stay curious, and remember, in crypto, knowledge is the real fortune. But before we end this story, there's one question that still keeps people awake. What if the hard drive is still working? Think about that. Right now, at this exact moment, somewhere beneath layers of garbage, under dirt, metal, and forgotten waste, there might still be a hidden fortune, silent, untouched, waiting. 8,000 Bitcoin, a number that once looked meaningless. But today, it represents a fortune so massive that most people can barely imagine it. And maybe that's what makes this story so unforgettable. Because unlike most financial mistakes, this one never truly ended. There was no final answer, no clear ending, no moment when everything was solved. Only questions, only possibilities, only regret, and hope. Hope that maybe, one day, against all odds, that hard drive will be found. Imagine the headlines: lost Bitcoin fortune finally recovered. Man finds millions in landfill. Biggest crypto mystery solved. Sounds impossible, right? But then again, so did Bitcoin. And maybe that's the biggest lesson about life. Sometimes the opportunities we ignore become the things we regret the most. And sometimes one careless moment creates a story the entire world never forgets. So tell me honestly, if you were James, would you spend years trying to recover it? Or would you move on? Comment below, because I genuinely want to know what you would do. And if this story shocked you, subscribe to Crypto Legends, because here we uncover the craziest crypto stories, the biggest investing mistakes, and financial lessons that could save you from future regret. Thanks for watching. And remember, in the world of crypto, fortunes are created, fortunes are lost, but knowledge stays forever.